Hand of the Loa by John Casuccio, narrated by Otis Jiry. Dead grass and tall weeds crunched under his leather shoes on the way home from the schoolhouse. A leather book strap dug into his shoulder and held the weight of his books high on his back, while afternoon sun baked his skin under a long-sleeved uniform. He couldn't remember the last time it rained, but when they needed it, there was usually just enough to keep crops sickly but alive and food on the table. The small farming community had banded together to survive the drought years ago, and held strong until their own sickness came. It had been almost a year since his mother became the last person to die, and things were only now getting back to normal. Life is only as hard as the good times you've lost, and Michael hadn't known many. He learned to find his happiness in the small things. He couldn't stop the smile that prodded the corner of his mouth since about noon today, when he sat outside under the oak tree talking and planning with his friend. His thoughts were focused on the small adventure they planned for tonight. The books grew heavier as the neighbors' houses came into view, 4 in total on his road, standing in large staggered lots on each side. His house was the farthest away. Michael's eyes shifted to the ground and watched the toes of his shoes as they swung in and out of sight. "Eyes up, boy. Watch where you're going," his dad always said. But the walk was always easier when he couldn't see how much walking was left to do. Michael's father was a carpenter and also tended to the farming equipment. He had a workshop on their land not far from the house. He was a warm man with hands made thick and heavy the way old worn tools turn into steel. Michael worked hard in school to make his dad proud, but never thought he'd grow up to be as impressive as the old man. His shoes swung from brown grass to hard-cracked road dirt, and he knew he was almost there. "How's your day, Mikey?" He unslung the book strap and set the load on a tool bench. Ever since his mom had passed on, his dad liked it when he stopped by the shop after school. It had become part of the routine before disappearing into the house for his evening studies. "Randy said his house is haunted. He heard footsteps on the roof," the words flew out. Michael's dad paused from his work and pushed the back of his wrist across his wet forehead. "Randy has possums in his attic. I've been trying to get his pop to let me fix that roof for years," his dad said dryly. "You tell Randy to tell his dad I'll get rid of those ghosts for him soon as he changes his mind," and as if to acknowledge the gleam in his son's eye, "You two stay away from there. Those things isn't safe. Liable to get if you start poking around." Randy was Michael's best friend and lived in the house next down on the same side of the road. It was a ways off, but he could see it well enough from his bedroom window that sometimes they'd flash messages back and forth after dark with lanterns, just like the old-timers used to do. Today at school, Randy said he'd flash 3 long times if he heard anything on the roof tonight. Michael would flash back 3 times if he could see something up there, twice if not. He couldn't wait for it to get dark, but knew his dad would call him foolish. He only shared the beginning of his story because he was too excited to hold the entire thing in. The rest of their plans were best kept secret. They talked a while longer about less fantastic things before Michael made the last leg of his hike home. He kicked his shoes off on the front porch, ran through the great room, climbed the stairs, and trekked down the hallway to his bedroom. The sun fell behind a wall of trees, and soon the moon lit up the clearing of homes. Michael dragged his desk chair over to the window and put his unlit lantern on the floor beside him. Just as he was wondering if Randy had fallen asleep, the signal came. Flash, flash, flash. He searched intently from the window. Nothing. He turned for his matches when the movement caught his attention. A figure stood up on the roof and looked out over the road. He must have missed it climbing up in the dark, but it was there, standing silhouetted by the moonlight. He panicked and pressed his palms against the cold glass, his eyes fixed. The figure was tall, willowy, and somewhat unnatural, as if a strong wind might be able to take it away. It began moving across the roof with a slow, limping gait. Michael tried to swallow, but only made a dry click. Flash, flash, flash. Michael's trance broke. He grabbed for the matches, then lantern, missing it the first time because his eyes didn't want to listen to him and look away from the window. He struck the match and lit the wick. Looking out the window, blinded to the dark by the lantern's light, he held it at arm's length with a book in his other hand to create the signal. Flash, flash, flash. Michael blew out the flame and stared from the window, his night vision slowly returning. The figure was gone. He blinked hard and kept searching, trying to get rid of the spots. His vision cleared. Standing at the other end of the roof, directly over Randy's window, was the tall, willowy figure, staring back at him with a dim yellow glow where its face should be. Its attention was firmly locked, and Michael was paralyzed with fear. Flash, flash, flash went the face. His limbs went numb. He staggered backwards, twisting himself away from the window and losing his balance. He slipped over in a heap on the hard floor. Michael turned back to the window, eyes wide and unblinking. The curtains hung limp, framing a view of nothing but clear night sky. Scrambling across the floor, staying low enough that he wouldn't see Randy's house again, he pulled the curtains closed. He ran through the dark to his bed and pulled the blankets up. For hours he waited and stared at the night glow around the curtains. Soon his fear was eased by the rising sun. Sleep took over and comforted him through the early hours of the morning. Voices from downstairs carried him back into the world. They rarely had visitors this early in the morning, and never so many at one time. How long had he slept? He tried to piece together everything that happened the night before. If it hadn't been for the curtains, the lantern laying on its side, and the shadow of a bruise on his knee, he might have been happy believing he imagined the whole thing. Did I? The talking stopped as Michael entered the room. Several of their neighbors were there, 5 in all. Both of Randy's parents were pale and looked to be the center of conversation. "Mikey, good morning." Randy's dad spoke through a pained smile. His mom stared intently at nothing, her eyes red and swollen. Michael's dad stood, motioned him to come, and clasped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Randy's not doing so well. His folks say he's pretty ill, so he won't be at school today. No visitors. Understand?" Fear gripped him like a vice. He could only nod in reply. He wanted to tell them what he had seen last night. He wanted to take them upstairs and point out his window and show them the thing he saw on the roof over his friend's bedroom. But what could he say that they'd believe? He was struggling just to convince himself. The school day came and went, and soon Michael was walking home again. This morning he kept his head down as he passed his friend's house, afraid he might find proof of what he saw the night before. But now, after building up his courage all day, he couldn't help himself. Randy's house came into view. The roof, or what he could see of it, was empty. There was nothing out of the ordinary at all. He didn't know what he expected, but he expected something. Some kind of evidence that there was a man there the night before. He needed to talk with Randy about what had happened, but more than that, he needed to know his friend was going to be okay. Michael looked up and down the road for anyone who could be watching, then sneaked around the side of the house. Tuck! The small stone bounced off the second-floor window. Tuck, tink! He felt the grass and dirt for another one, and looked up only to be surprised by the white face of Randy's mother staring down at him from the blackness of the window. Michael felt his cheeks flush with shame and waited for her confusion to turn into anger. She only stared at him, eyes full of the same pain and sadness he saw that morning, and drew the curtains closed. He made his way home, slipping past the workshop, and went straight to his room. Somehow, his dad always knew when he'd been doing things he was told not to do, and he didn't want to test his luck so soon after the offense. Dinner was quiet. It hadn't been like this since his mother left them. Back then, Michael didn't know if his dad was ever going to speak again. She'd gotten sick one night, and Michael was kept away from her over his father's fears of contagion. A couple days later, his father broke the news. They were the last words spoken between them for almost a week. He sat at the table with his dad and sank deeper into fear with each silent second. "How bad is it, Dad? Is Randy going to be okay? I know what did it. I can help." But he said nothing. After dinner, Michael went to his room and pulled his desk chair to the unlit square on the floor in front of his window. The clouds melted from orange to pink to blue, and soon the world was a black cutout against the night sky. And Michael watched. Hours passed. His head was down, and his eyes had closed. He stirred awake, and the sound of Randy's voice echoed the silence in his ears. What had he been dreaming? It was already lost from his mind. Flash, flash, flash. The light from Randy's room made Michael leap from his chair toward the window. Flash, flash, flash. His excitement gave way to doubt, and doubt to confusion. Michael scanned the horizon of his friend's roof and saw nothing. No one was there. Was he just signaling that he was okay? He searched for his matches and broke the first one in his excitement. The second lit true, and a moment later he was furiously signaling his reply. Flash, flash. Holding his breath, only darkness answered. Flash, flash. He signaled to Randy again, this time slower, and waited. The reply finally came. Flash, flash, flash. But Randy's room stayed dark this time. The flashing was lower, from outside the house, from where he stood earlier throwing rocks at his friend's window. Flash, flash, flash. It was closer now, in the field almost halfway between their houses. The light flashed 3 more times, moving closer with each signal. Goose flesh covered his body, and his lungs seized. What appeared to be only one dim yellow light flashing in the distance were now 2 distinct orbs only inches apart. They were eyes. 3 more flashes came, this time from his own yard. 3 more flashes followed seconds later, peering up at his second-floor window from the pitch only a few feet away from the house. Michael ran from the window and hid on the floor beside his bed, pulling the covers down over him. The only sound was his heartbeat deafening inside his head, and he begged for it to stop so he could hear if the thing was coming. Thump! His attention shot upward to the ceiling. It started as a soft shuffling, and then it began scraping. The footsteps were clear but sounded wrong. One moment, he was sure he heard more than 1 pair of feet moving. The next, it sounded like there were no feet at all, only a dragging sound moving from one side of the roof to the other. Everything stopped. The noises were gone, and Michael willed himself to breathe again. For the first time, he realized he was sitting in a puddle on the floor and didn't know if he would be strong enough to stand. He fought to his feet. He ran to the bedroom door. He needed his father. Flash, flash, flash. His shadow burned into the door in front of him 3 times. Michael trembled and fell against it. His legs failed him, and as his hips struck the door, he let out a cry. It was meant to be a scream for help or mercy, but neither would come. It was there, upside down on the outside of the house, watching. The creature descended and barely made a sound as it fell into the room, not caring enough to acknowledge the existence of the closed window that Michael prayed would protect him. Invisible in the darkness under the sill and before the moonlight on his floor, it was there. Its hands reached forward from the black, crossing into the light, propelled towards him by what looked like endless spindle-fed arms. The monster's fingers, long and blunt at the tips with earth ground deep underneath splintered nails, scraped across his skin and anchored into him with inhuman strength. The arms retracted, pulling him across the floor towards the abyss they reached from. As he entered the light of a window, a face formed at the opposite end, stretching out to him without its body. Broken and bent, its mouth was twisted into a soundless scream of terror. One eye fixed directly on him, the other rolled away in its socket. Flash, flash, flash! The next morning, Michael's father sat in the kitchen of Randy's house, his eyes vacant and cheeks wet. The 6 of them all gathered together again. Randy's parents tried to comfort him, but they knew there was nothing that could be said. They had 2 bodies to bury next to the others now, and no idea if these would be the last before it left them alone again. Each of them secretly prayed it would take them to the next so the guilt, terror, and lies would be over. They all knew their debt was coming, but none of them had any idea of the horror that would be sent to collect it. They had agreed to such a high price, but they were helpless to stop it now. What good were crops if there would be so few people to live off of them? The deal had been made, however, and those who made it remained unharmed. They were promised long and healthy lives, and each would curse their reward of increasing abundance for many years to come with broken hearts and empty homes.